I had just finished my morning coffee when Patricia Henderson came storming up my driveway, waving a piece of paper like it was a court summons from the Supreme Court itself. The snow was still falling heavy across our neighborhood in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and I was already dreading whatever complaint she had cooked up this time. "Liam Ortiz, I need to speak with you immediately." Her voice cut through the quiet morning like nails on a chalkboard. I set down my mug and stepped out onto my porch, pulling my coat tighter against the February cold. "Morning, Patricia. What seems to be the problem?" I knew there was a problem. There was always a problem when Patricia showed up unannounced. She thrust the paper toward me, her perfectly manicured nails somehow still pristine, despite the 8 inches of fresh powder we'd gotten overnight. "You need to add the HOA generator pad to your snow removal route. As the only resident in our community who operates a professional snow plowing service, you have an obligation to maintain all common areas." I took the paper from her hand and scanned it quickly. It was a formal notice, typed up on official Pine Ridge Estates letterhead, demanding that I include the community generator pad in my plowing services. The generator sat on a concrete pad behind the community center, about a quarter-mile from my house. "Patricia, I clear the main roads and the parking lot at the community center. That's what my contract with the HOA specifies. The generator pad isn't mentioned anywhere in our agreement." Her eyes narrowed, and I could see that familiar flush creeping up her neck. "The contract says you'll maintain all common areas necessary for the health and safety of residents. The generator provides backup power during outages. That makes it a health and safety issue." I had to give her credit for creativity. Patricia had been the HOA president for 3 years now, and she'd gotten very good at stretching the interpretation of rules to suit whatever agenda she was pushing that week. "The pad is 20 feet square, Patricia. It's not part of any walking path or access road. Nobody needs to walk on it or drive over it. The generator itself is weather-sealed and designed to operate in snow." "That's not the point." Her voice was rising now, and I noticed a few of my neighbors starting to peek out their windows. "What if we need to service the generator? What if there's an emergency and the technician can't reach it? Then the technician can shovel a path. That's a maintenance issue, not a snow removal issue. I'm not adding extra work to my contract without additional compensation." Patricia's face was now fully red, matching the expensive North Face jacket she was wearing. "This is unacceptable, Liam. The HOA board voted on this last night, 4-1. You're required to comply." "Let me see the meeting minutes," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I'll need to see where in my contract it requires me to follow orders that directly contradict the scope of work I agreed to." She sputtered for a moment, clearly not expecting me to push back. Most people in Pine Ridge Estates just rolled over when Patricia made demands. That's how she'd managed to pass increasingly ridiculous rules over the years. No basketball hoops visible from the street. No holiday decorations up before December 1st or after January 2nd. No vehicles parked in driveways overnight, even though most of our garages were packed with storage and couldn't fit cars anyway. "I'll have the minutes sent to you by end of business today," she snapped. "But let me make this clear. If you don't comply with this directive, the HOA will fine you $200 per day until you do. And we'll find another contractor to handle all the snow removal, not just the generator pad." That last part was a bluff. I was the only person in our community who owned proper snow removal equipment, and I charged well below market rate because I lived here and had to plow my own driveway anyway. Bringing in an outside contractor would cost the HOA 3 times what they were paying me. "You do what you need to do, Patricia. I'll be waiting for those meeting minutes." I turned and walked back into my house, closing the door firmly behind me. Through the window, I watched her stomp back down my driveway, nearly slipping on a patch of ice I hadn't gotten to yet. She caught herself on my mailbox post and shot a glare back at my house before continuing on her way. My phone buzzed 20 minutes later. It was Tom Paulson, one of my neighbors and the only board member who'd voted against Patricia's generator pad decree. "Hey, Liam, I wanted to give you a heads up about last night," Tom said. "Patricia sprung this whole generator pad thing on us with no warning. Said she'd inspected it after the last storm and found it completely buried in snow. Claimed it was a liability issue." "The generator doesn't need the pad cleared," I said. "I looked at the installation specs when they put it in 2 years ago. The intake vents are 6 feet off the ground. The exhaust is even higher. Snow on the pad doesn't affect anything." Yeah, that's what I tried to explain. But Patricia had already done her research. She found some obscure clause in the community covenants about maintaining clear access to all emergency equipment. Then she got Martin and the Kowalskis to vote with her. Martin Reed and the Kowalski couple were Patricia's regular voting bloc. They'd support whatever she wanted as long as she let them get away with their own rule violations. Martin had a boat parked in his backyard that violated the storage regulations, and the Kowalskis had built a deck extension without getting architectural approval from the board. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Well, legally, you'd have to comply or face the fines. But here's the thing. I looked at your contract this morning. It specifically lists every area you're responsible for clearing. The generator pad isn't on that list." "They'd have to amend the contract, and that requires your agreement." So she's bluffing about the fines, probably. But you know Patricia. She'll make your life miserable until she gets her way. I've seen her do it to 3 different families now. They all ended up either giving in or moving away. I thought about that for a moment. The Hendersons, who'd wanted to paint their shutters blue instead of the approved forest green. The young couple with the vegetable garden Patricia claimed was an eyesore. The retired teacher who'd installed solar panels without permission. Thanks for the warning, Tom. I appreciate you voting against this nonsense. Just be careful, man. Patricia's got connections with the property management company that handles our HOA finances. I wouldn't put it past her to try something sneaky. After hanging up, I sat down at my computer and pulled up my contract with the HOA. Tom was right. It was very specific about what areas I was responsible for maintaining. Main roads within the community center parking lot, and the walking path that connected the north and south sections of the neighborhood. Nothing about the generator pad. I also checked the community covenants Patricia had referenced. The clause about emergency equipment access was real, but it applied to the HOA's maintenance responsibilities, not to individual contractors. They had to ensure access was maintained, but how they did that was up to them. The snow continued falling throughout the day. By evening, we had another 6 inches on top of the morning's accumulation. I fired up my plow truck around 8 p.m. and started making my rounds through Pine Ridge Estates. The roads first, pushing the heavy snow into neat berms on either side. Then the parking lot, creating proper drainage channels so the melt wouldn't flood the community center entrance. I drove past the generator pad on my way out. The area was completely undisturbed, covered in a smooth blanket of white that sparkled under my headlights. The generator itself was barely visible, just a large rectangular shadow beneath the snow. The pad was maybe 40 feet from the nearest plowed area, sitting in a little depression behind the community center, where they'd installed it to minimize noise complaints. A thought occurred to me as I sat there idling. Patricia wanted the pad cleared. She demanded it. threatened me with fines, tried to bully me into doing work that wasn't in my contract. What if I did exactly what she asked, just not the way she expected? I put the truck in reverse and backed up until I was positioned at the edge of the parking lot, where the plow blade pointed directly at the generator pad. Then I dropped the blade, shifted into drive, and started pushing snow. The blade bit into the accumulated powder, building up a wave of white in front of it as I drove forward. I angled the push so the snow would spread across the entire generator pad area, not just pile up in one spot. Back and forth I went, methodically redirecting all the snow from the parking lot onto that 20 by 20 foot square of concrete. It took me about 45 minutes to completely bury the generator. By the time I was done, there was a solid 5-foot berm of packed snow covering the entire pad and the generator itself. You couldn't even see the unit anymore. It looked like a small mountain of white in the darkness. I sat in my truck, admiring my handiwork. Technically, I had plowed the generator pad. The snow on top of it now was fresh, pushed there by my plow, not fallen naturally. If Patricia wanted to argue about semantics and contract interpretations, I could play that game too. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The storm had moved on, leaving behind that perfect Colorado blue sky that tourists pay thousands of dollars to experience. I was eating breakfast when my phone started ringing. Patricia's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately. I ignored that one too. By the third call, I figured I should answer before she drove over here again. "Good morning, Patricia. What did you do?" Her voice was barely controlled fury. "What did you do to the generator?" "I plowed the generator pad just like you demanded, put it in writing and everything, remember?" "You buried it. You completely buried it under 5 feet of snow." "Well, I had to put the snow from the parking lot somewhere. The pad seemed like a convenient spot. It's just an empty concrete slab, right? Not like anyone needs to walk on it or access it." The silence on the other end of the line stretched out for several seconds. I could practically hear her blood pressure rising. "You remove that snow immediately, Liam. Right now. This is sabotage. Actually, Patricia, it's snow removal." I removed snow from the areas specified in my contract and relocated it to an area that isn't specified in my contract. Where I put the snow I collect is my business decision as the contractor. This is going to cost you. The board is meeting tonight, and we're going to fine you for every single day that generator remains inaccessible. On what grounds? I fulfilled my contractual obligations. I cleared the roads in the parking lot. Where I pile the snow isn't covered in our agreement. You're creating a safety hazard. The generator works fine under snow, Patricia. You said so yourself. The only issue would be if a technician needed to service it, and that's a maintenance concern, not a snow removal concern. Maybe you should contract with someone to handle generator pad maintenance separately from road clearing. I could hear her breathing heavily through the phone. "This isn't over, Liam. Not by a long shot." She hung up before I could respond. I finished my breakfast and went out to check on my equipment. The plow blade needed some maintenance, and I wanted to make sure everything was ready for the next storm. Weather forecasts said we had a few days of clear skies, but this was Colorado in February. That could change fast. True to her word, Patricia called an emergency HOA board meeting that evening. I received the notice at 3 p.m., informing me that my presence was requested but not required. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community center. I showed up at 6:45 with a folder containing my contract, the original bid proposal I'd submitted 3 years ago, and printouts of the community covenant sections relevant to contractor obligations. Tom Paulson was already there, looking uncomfortable. Martin Reed sat next to Patricia at the head table, shuffling through papers. The Kowalskis arrived a few minutes later. "Thank you for coming, Liam," Patricia said in a tone that suggested she wasn't thankful at all. "We need to discuss your flagrant disregard for community safety." "I'm happy to discuss anything you'd like, Patricia, but I want the record to show that I've fulfilled every obligation in my contract with the HOA." She pulled out her own folder, laying documents across the table. "Let's talk about what you did to the generator pad. You intentionally buried essential emergency equipment under tons of snow. I cleared the parking lot as required by my contract. The snow had to go somewhere. You specifically targeted the generator pad. Multiple residents saw you making repeated passes to ensure maximum coverage." That was true but irrelevant. The pad was the most convenient location for snow storage. It's flat, unused, and out of the way. Standard snow removal practice. Martin Reed leaned forward, his jowls quivering slightly. "Come on, Liam. We all know this was retaliation for yesterday's directive about clearing the pad." "Actually, Martin, it was practical decision-making. Patricia wanted the pad cleared. I cleared all the snow that was on it naturally, then replaced it with snow from the parking lot. Net result is the same amount of snow in that location, but the parking lot is now completely clear. I'd call that a win for the community." Patricia's hands were clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. "You're playing word games." The intent of the directive was obviously to keep the generator accessible. Then, perhaps the directive should have been written more clearly. My contract specifies exactly what areas I'm responsible for clearing and maintaining. If the board wants to expand that scope, we need to negotiate an amendment with appropriate additional compensation. Tom spoke up for the first time. "Patricia, he's got a point. The contract is pretty clear. We can't just demand extra work without adjusting the terms." "This isn't about extra work, Tom. This is about an essential safety system being deliberately sabotaged." "I didn't sabotage anything," I said calmly. "The generator is functioning perfectly. It's designed to operate in snow. The only issue is physical access to the unit, which isn't covered in my contract or my responsibilities." Patricia pulled out another document. "Then let's talk about this. Section 7 of the Community Covenants. All residents are required to maintain community property in a condition that doesn't create hazards or impediments to emergency services. I'm not a resident in this context. I'm a contractor. Different section entirely. But even if that applied, I'm not maintaining the generator pad. The HOA maintains it. I just handle snow removal from specified areas." The back and forth continued for another hour. Patricia kept trying different angles to prove I'd violated some rule or regulation. I calmly referenced my contract and the actual language of the covenants. The Kowalskis barely spoke except to vote when Patricia called for motions. Tom pushed back on the more egregious interpretations Patricia tried to make stick. Finally, Patricia called for a vote on levying daily fines against me for willful destruction of HOA property access. Tom immediately objected that no destruction had occurred. Martin argued that intent mattered more than technical compliance. Mrs. Kowalski wanted to know if this would impact the HOA's insurance rates. The vote was 3-2 in favor of the fines. Tom and I weren't surprised. Patricia had her block locked down. The fine is $200 per day, starting tomorrow, until the generator pad is cleared and accessible. Patricia announced with evident satisfaction. "The funds will be automatically deducted from your HOA account." "I'll be filing a formal dispute," I said, "and I want it noted in the minutes that I'm prepared to take this to arbitration if necessary." Noted, this meeting is adjourned. I walked out with Tom, who looked frustrated. "Sorry, man, I tried. Don't worry about it." She's overplayed her hand this time. Those fines aren't enforceable under the contract terms. You going to get a lawyer? Already have one on retainer for my business. I'll give him a call tomorrow. What Patricia didn't know was that I'd dealt with difficult clients before. Running a snow removal and landscaping business meant knowing construction law, contract law, and property law. I wasn't some random homeowner she could bully into submission. My lawyer, David Chen, called me back the next morning after reviewing the documents I'd emailed him. "This is pretty straightforward, Liam. They can't fine you for work that isn't specified in your contract. The covenant she's citing doesn't apply to contractors, only to residents acting in their capacity as property owners." That's what I thought. What about their threat to deduct from my HOA account? They can try, but if you dispute it immediately, they have to hold off until the dispute is resolved. Usually that means arbitration. HOA contracts in Colorado typically include mandatory arbitration clauses. Ours does. What's the timeline on something like that? Couple months to get a hearing scheduled. But here's the thing. Once you file for arbitration, the HOA has to cover their own legal costs. Most HOAs don't want that expense, especially for something this petty. My guess is they'll back down once they realize you're serious. Patricia Henderson doesn't strike me as the backing down type. David laughed. Then we'll let an arbitrator explain basic contract law to her. It'll cost the HOA a few thousand in legal fees and they'll lose. Might be worth it just to set a precedent. I filed the dispute that afternoon, using the formal process outlined in the HOA governing documents. Every community association in Colorado had to provide a dispute resolution process. I cited the specific contract language that defined my scope of work and pointed out that the generator pad wasn't included. I also referenced the covenant sections that Patricia had misapplied. The dispute notice went to Patricia and the entire board, plus the property management company that handled the HOA's administrative tasks. Within an hour, I got a call from someone I'd never spoken with before. "Mr. Ortiz, this is Janet Wu from Mountain States Property Management. I'm calling about your dispute notice regarding snow removal services." "Yes, I just filed it this afternoon. I've reviewed your contract and the meeting minutes from last night's board session. I have to say, I'm concerned about the board's interpretation of your obligations. The contract is quite clear about what areas you're responsible for maintaining. This was unexpected. I appreciate you looking into it. Does this mean the HOA won't be pursuing the fines?" "Well, that's not my decision to make. I can only provide recommendations to the board. But I'm going to advise them that these fines are likely unenforceable and that pursuing them could open the HOA to liability." "What kind of liability?" "If you proceed to arbitration and win, which seems likely, you could potentially sue for legal fees and damages. The HOA's insurance might not cover it if we proceed with actions I've specifically advised against." Sounds like Patricia might have a problem. Janet's voice took on a careful tone. "Miss Henderson is very passionate about her role as board president. Sometimes that passion leads to decisions that aren't in the HOA's best interest. Between you and me, this isn't the first time I've had to walk back one of her initiatives." We talked for a few more minutes about the timeline for resolving the dispute. Janet promised to present her findings to the board at their next regular meeting, which was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, the fines would be suspended pending resolution. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I woke up to find a citation from the county building department taped to my front door. Someone had filed a complaint about illegal dumping of snow on community property. The citation required me to appear before the code enforcement officer within 10 days to address the violation. I called David Chen immediately. They're escalating. Patricia must have called in the complaint. Can you prove it was her? Who else would it be? This happened right after I filed the HOA dispute. Doesn't matter if we can't prove it, but here's the good news. Snow placement during legitimate plowing operations isn't illegal dumping. You're going to go to that meeting, explain that you were fulfilling your contract with the HOA and show them the documentation. They'll dismiss it. What if they don't? Then we fight it. But they will. Code enforcement has better things to do than referee HOA disputes. The meeting with code enforcement was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I showed up with copies of my contractor's license, my snow removal contract with the HOA, and photographs of the generator pad both before and after I'd plowed. The code enforcement officer was a tired-looking man in his 50s named Robert Bradford. He reviewed my documents with the expression of someone who'd seen this exact scenario play out many times before. "Mr. Ortiz, I'm going to be straight with you. We get about a dozen of these HOA-related complaints every winter. Someone does something another resident doesn't like. They file a code complaint hoping we'll do their dirty work for them. So this is getting dismissed. You're a licensed contractor performing services under a valid contract. Snow has to go somewhere when you plow. Unless you're blocking public roads or creating a genuine hazard, you're not violating any codes." He stamped a form and slid it across his desk. "Complaint dismissed. No violation found. What happens to whoever filed the false complaint?" Technically, filing a false complaint is a misdemeanor. Practically, we don't have the resources to pursue it unless someone does it repeatedly or maliciously. Consider this a warning to whoever filed it. If they do it again, we might take action. I left the county building feeling vindicated but also concerned. Patricia was clearly willing to escalate beyond the HOA's internal processes. What else might she try? The answer came 2 days later when a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. "Mr. Liam Ortiz." "That's me. I need to ask you some questions about property damage at the Pine Ridge Estates Community Center." My stomach dropped. "What kind of property damage?" "Someone filed a report claiming you deliberately damaged a backup generator. Can you tell me about your interactions with that equipment?" I invited the deputy inside and explained the entire situation, starting with Patricia's demand that I clear the generator pad. I showed him my contract, the dispute notice, and the code enforcement dismissal. He took notes and asked clarifying questions. "So you did bury the generator under snow?" I cleared the parking lot and placed the snow in an unused area. The generator was already covered in snow from natural accumulation. I just added more snow from plowing. "Did you damage the generator in any way?" "I never touched the generator. My plow blade never came within 10 feet of the unit itself. I only pushed snow onto the concrete pad around it." The deputy closed his notebook. "Mr. Ortiz, I'm going to be honest with you. This is a civil dispute, not a criminal matter. There's no evidence of property damage. Snow isn't a damaging substance. The person who filed this report was trying to use law enforcement to resolve an HOA disagreement. Patricia Henderson filed the report. I can't confirm who filed it, but I can tell you that filing a false police report is a crime. If someone continues to make baseless criminal complaints, they could face charges themselves." After the deputy left, I sat down and really thought about the situation. Patricia had now tried to use HOA fines, code enforcement, and the sheriff's department against me. Each attempt had failed, but she was clearly not going to stop. This had become personal for her. I called Tom Paulson to get his read on things. "She's losing it, Liam. At the last board meeting, she spent 20 minutes ranting about your insubordination. Martin and the Kowalskis looked uncomfortable. Uncomfortable enough to change their votes. Maybe. The property management company sent over a very pointed memo about the liability issues with pursuing unenforceable fines. I think even Patricia's allies are starting to realize she's putting the HOA at risk. What's her play now? She wants to terminate your contract entirely and hire an outside snow removal company. She's getting quotes. That would actually be fine with me at this point. The HOA contract was a small part of my business, more of a convenience than a necessity. But I knew it would end up costing the other residents a lot more money. Let her. She'll find out real quick that outside contractors charge 3 times what I do. That's what I told her. She doesn't care. She said it's worth the extra cost to teach you a lesson about respecting HOA authority. With whose money? That's going to mean a special assessment or increased dues. She's planning to propose a special assessment at the annual meeting next month. $50 per household for snow removal contract premium. I did the math in my head. Pine Ridge Estates had 92 homes. That was $4,600 extra on top of what they were already paying me. For the same service, just delivered by someone who didn't live in the community and would take longer to respond to storms. The residents are going to love that. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. A bunch of us are getting together to discuss Patricia's leadership. This generator thing has been the last straw for a lot of people. We're thinking about calling for a vote of no confidence. This was interesting. The bylaws allow that. Yep. Any 10 residents can petition for a special vote on board member removal. We've already got 15 signatures. If we can get a majority of residents to vote for removal, Patricia's off the board. What does she think about this? She doesn't know yet. We're keeping it quiet until we file the petition. But Liam, I need to warn you, if she finds out, she's going to go nuclear. She's already tried to find me, get me cited by the county, and filed a false police report. How much more nuclear can she get? I found out the answer to that question 3 days before the petition was supposed to be filed. I was out running errands when my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Sarah Mitchell, and she sounded panicked. Liam, you need to get home right now. There are people at your house. What people? Some kind of emergency crew, and Patricia's there. They're digging out the generator. I turned my truck around and headed back to Pine Ridge Estates, probably breaking a few speed limits on the way. When I pulled into the community, I could see a small crowd gathered behind the community center. A commercial excavator was parked near the generator pad, and 2 workers in high-vis vests were using a snow blower to clear the area. Patricia stood off to the side with Martin Reed, watching the work with satisfaction. I parked and walked over, already knowing this wasn't going to be pleasant. Patricia, what's going on here? She turned to face me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The HOA is taking care of essential maintenance since our contractor refused to do so. We've hired professionals to ensure our emergency equipment remains accessible. I'm the professional you hired for snow removal. Your services are no longer required. The board voted last night to terminate your contract, effective immediately. These gentlemen are from Alpine Snow Solutions out of Denver. I looked at the excavator and the industrial-grade snow blower they were using. That equipment rental alone probably cost more than my entire seasonal contract. And how much is this costing the HOA? That's none of your concern anymore. However, we will be billing you for the emergency service call since this situation was created by your negligence. You can't bill me for work that isn't in my contract, and you can't terminate my contract without proper notice. The agreement requires 30 days written notice from either party. Patricia's smile widened. Actually, there's a clause allowing for immediate termination in cases of gross negligence or willful harm to HOA property. Your actions with the generator qualified. The board voted 4-1 last night. Tom was the only dissent as usual. She handed me a termination letter, properly formatted on HOA letterhead. I scanned it quickly. They'd cited the gross negligence clause and provided documentation of my refusal to maintain emergency equipment access. It was complete nonsense, but technically followed the procedural requirements. I'll be disputing this. Dispute all you want. You're still terminated, and you'll still be receiving a bill for today's emergency service, $4,000. The crew was very expensive on short notice. I watched the workers for a moment. They'd already cleared most of the snow from the generator pad and were now exposing the unit itself. The generator looked completely fine, exactly as it should. No damage, no problems. It had never needed to be cleared. You're making a big mistake, Patricia. The only mistake was trusting you to handle professional services. Go home, Liam. You're no longer needed here. I left before I said something I'd regret. Back at my house, I immediately called David Chen and explained what had happened. They can terminate you if they followed procedure, which it sounds like they did. The gross negligence claim is garbage, but proving that would require arbitration, which takes time. What about billing me for the emergency service? That's even worse than the fines. You can't be held financially responsible for work you didn't authorize, especially when that work was to address a manufactured emergency. They'll never collect on that. So what do? Document everything. Take photos of the generator showing no damage. Get copies of all the communications. And wait, Patricia's overreach is going to catch up with her. The petition for Patricia's removal was filed the next day. Tom and the other residents had gathered 63 signatures, enough to trigger a mandatory special vote. According to the bylaws, the vote had to be held within 30 days of filing. Patricia's response was predictably explosive. She sent out a mass email to all residents claiming the petition was part of a conspiracy by certain residents who refused to follow community rules. She didn't name me specifically, but the implication was clear. She also moved forward with the special assessment for the new snow removal contract. Alpine Snow Solutions had quoted $28,000 for the rest of the winter, more than triple what I'd been charging. Patricia proposed spreading the cost across all residents as a one-time assessment of $304 per household. The email announcing the assessment landed in everyone's inbox 2 days after the petition was filed. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Liam, what the hell is going on? It was Marcus Freeman, one of my neighbors from the South Section. $300 because Patricia doesn't like you. It's not about me, Marcus. It's about her not getting her way. Well, a bunch of us are pissed. We're all voting to remove her. This is ridiculous. I got similar calls from a dozen other residents over the next few days. The sentiment was clear. People were tired of Patricia's authoritarian approach and weren't willing to pay extra just to support her vendetta. Then the weather changed. A massive storm system moved into Colorado, and forecasters were predicting 2 to 3 feet of snow over a 48-hour period. The kind of storm that shut down highways and trapped people in their homes if roads weren't cleared quickly. Alpine Snow Solutions was supposed to handle it. They'd promised 24-hour response times in their contract. But when the snow started falling on a Wednesday afternoon, their trucks didn't show up. I watched from my window as the accumulation built up rapidly. By evening, there was already a foot on the ground and it was still coming down heavy. The main roads through Pine Ridge Estates were becoming impassable, My phone rang at 9 p.m. It was Olivia Valdez, a single mother who lived 3 houses down from me. "Liam, I need to get to work tomorrow morning. I'm a nurse at the hospital. If these roads aren't cleared, I can't get out. Call the HOA. They hired Alpine Snow Solutions." I did. They said they're dealing with priority contracts first and might not get to us until Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon. 2 full days from now. That was unacceptable. People had jobs, obligations, emergencies. You couldn't just leave an entire neighborhood snowed in for 2 days. I called Tom. "Where's the snow removal crew Patricia hired?" "Nobody knows. She's freaking out." Apparently Alpine is way overcommitted. They took on too many contracts this season and can't service them all during major storms. That's criminally negligent. Yep, and it's going to turn the entire community against Patricia, but that doesn't help the people who need to get out tomorrow. I thought about it for a moment. The petty part of me wanted to let Patricia deal with the consequences of her decisions. But there were 92 families in this community, most of whom had nothing to do with this dispute. People like Olivia who needed clear roads to get to work. "I'm going to Plow," I said. "Liam, you don't have a contract with them anymore." "I don't care. I'll worry about getting paid later. Right now, people need help." I fired up my truck at 11 p.m. and started clearing the main roads. The snow was heavy and wet, perfect packing snow, but hell to plow. It took me 6 hours to make a complete circuit of Pine Ridge estates, pushing back the accumulated powder and creating navigable lanes. By 5 a.m., every main road was clear. I'd also cleared the community center parking lot out of habit, and I deliberately avoided the generator pad, leaving it buried under a massive drift that had built up naturally during the storm. The snow finally stopped around 7 a.m. I parked my truck and crashed into bed, exhausted but satisfied that at least people could get to work. I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. Messages from grateful neighbors thanking me for clearing the roads. 3 voicemails from Patricia demanding to know who authorized me to plow. And a text from Tom saying the special vote on Patricia's removal had been moved up to Saturday due to emergency circumstances. Friday afternoon, Alpine Snow Solutions finally sent a crew out. They cleared some additional areas and gave the main roads a second pass. Then they submitted their bill to the HOA. $8,000 for the emergency storm response, plus the previously quoted seasonal contract amount. Patricia tried to argue that the bill should be lower since I'd already cleared the roads, but Alpine pointed out that their contract required payment for storm responses regardless of what volunteer work residents did. The HOA was stuck with the full amount. The special vote was held on Saturday at 2 p.m. in the community center. 87 of the 92 households sent representatives, a record turnout. Patricia stood at the front of the room looking defiant as Tom explained the petition process. "We're here today to vote on the removal of Patricia Henderson from her position as HOA board president. This requires a majority vote of present residents. Each household gets 1 vote. Is there any discussion before we vote?" Patricia immediately raised her hand. "Yes. I want everyone to understand what's really happening here. This is a coordinated attack by residents who don't want to follow the rules. Liam Ortiz refused to properly maintain community property, then convinced others to support his rebellion. If you vote to remove me, you're sending a message that rules don't matter." Marcus Freeman stood up. "Patricia, you tried to fine Liam for work that wasn't in his contract. Then you filed false complaints with the county and the police. Then you fired him and stuck us with a $300 assessment for a company that left us stranded during the biggest storm of the year. This isn't about following rules. It's about your abuse of power." Several other residents voiced agreement. The discussion went on for 20 minutes, with Patricia trying to defend each of her actions and other residents pointing out the pattern of overreach. Finally, Tom called for the vote. Paper ballots were distributed to maintain anonymity. We took 5 minutes to mark our choices. Then Tom and 2 other volunteers collected and counted them. The result was 68 votes for removal, 19 votes against. Patricia Henderson was officially removed from the board, effective immediately. She stood there for a moment, face flushed red, hands trembling. "This is illegal. You can't remove a board president in the middle of their term." "The bylaws allow for it," Tom said calmly. "The vote was properly conducted. Your term as president is over. I'll sue all of you." "That's your right, but you're still removed from the board." Patricia grabbed her things and stormed out of the community center, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping. Others joined in. It felt like the whole community was exhaling after holding their breath for years. The board met immediately after to reorganize. Tom was elected as the new president. His first motion was to address the snow removal situation. "We need to resolve our contract dispute with Liam and rehire him for snow removal. Alpine is too expensive and unreliable. I move that we rescind the termination, apologize for the unwarranted treatment, and negotiate a fair amendment to include any additional services the board deems necessary." The motion passed 4-0. Martin Reid and the Kowalskis had suddenly found their spines now that Patricia wasn't there to manipulate them. Tom approached me after the meeting. "Will you consider coming back? Under what terms? Your original contract stays exactly as is. If we want additional work like the generator pad, we negotiate that separately with fair compensation. And the HOA formally apologizes for everything Patricia put you through." "What about the bills she tried to stick me with? All disputed charges are dropped." "The $4,000 for Alpine's emergency service is the HOA's problem, not yours. You're completely cleared." I thought about it. The HOA under Tom's leadership would be different. No more manufactured crises and power plays. Just a normal community organization maintaining common areas. "Okay. I'm in. But I want something in writing about the scope of work and the process for requesting additional services." "Done. I'll have Janet draft something up and we'll review it at the next board meeting." We shook hands, and I felt like maybe things would actually get back to normal. But I should have known Patricia wouldn't go quietly. Monday morning, I received a certified letter from a law firm in Denver. Patricia was suing me personally for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She claimed my actions with the generator had been part of a deliberate campaign to undermine her authority and damage her reputation in the community. David Chen read through the complaint and actually laughed. "This is one of the weakest lawsuits I've ever seen. She has no grounds for any of these claims. You never defamed her. You didn't harass her, and burying a generator under snow, even intentionally, doesn't constitute infliction of emotional distress. So it'll get dismissed, probably. But we have to respond, which means time and money. That might be her real goal, just to make your life difficult." We filed a response denying all allegations and moved for dismissal based on failure to state a claim. The judge scheduled a hearing for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, life in Pine Ridge Estates returned to something resembling normalcy. I resumed my snow removal duties under a new contract that clearly specified my responsibilities and the process for any additional work. 2 more storms came through, and I handled them efficiently without any drama. Patricia's lawsuit became the talk of the community. Most residents saw it as confirmation that removing her from the board had been the right decision. A few people who'd been friendly with her stopped talking to me, but that was a price I was willing to pay. The lawsuit hearing was scheduled for early April, after most of the snow had melted. I showed up at the courthouse in Denver with David Chen, prepared to defend myself against Patricia's ridiculous claims. Patricia was there with her attorney, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit who seemed bored with the whole proceeding. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Margaret Ortega, reviewed the case file before calling us to order. Miss Henderson, your attorney has filed suit against Mr. Ortiz for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress arising from a dispute within your homeowners association. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Ortiz deliberately sabotaged community property and then conspired with other residents to have me removed from my position as board president. Judge Ortega looked at the case file again. Mr. Ortiz, you're a snow removal contractor hired by the HOA. That's correct, Your Honor. And the alleged sabotage involved placing snow on a generator pad. Yes, madam. I cleared the parking lot and placed the snow in an unused area. The generator continued to function normally. The judge turned back to Patricia. Miss Henderson, I'm going to be direct with you. This case is a waste of the court's time. Snow removal is not sabotage. Being voted off a volunteer board position is not grounds for a lawsuit against a contractor who was simply doing his job. Your claims of defamation and harassment are completely unsupported by the evidence presented. Patricia's attorney stood up. Your Honor, if I may address the emotional distress claim. You may not. There's no basis for any of these claims. Case dismissed. The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. Patricia looked stunned. Her attorney packed up her briefcase with practiced efficiency, probably already thinking about her next case. David and I walked out of the courthouse into the spring sunshine. That was easier than I expected, I said. Frivolous lawsuits usually are once you get before a judge. The problem is getting to that point. What happens now? Nothing. Case is dismissed. Patricia could appeal, but she'd lose and probably face sanctions for filing baseless appeals. My guess is her attorney will talk her out of it. He was right. I never heard from Patricia's lawyer again. But Patricia herself wasn't quite done yet. 2 weeks later, Tom called me with disturbing news. The property management company flagged some irregularities in the HOA financial records. It looks like Patricia made several unauthorized transactions during her time as president. What kind of transactions? Payments to herself for consulting fees, reimbursements for expenses that were never approved. It adds up to about $15,000 over 2 years. That's embezzlement. Yeah, we're bringing in a forensic accountant to review everything. If it's as bad as it looks, we might have to involve the police. The forensic accountant confirmed the worst. Patricia had been systematically stealing from the HOA for most of her tenure as president. She'd hidden it by spreading transactions across multiple budget categories and filing false reimbursement requests. The board had no choice but to report it to the authorities. Detective Sarah Morrison from the Steamboat Springs Police Department took over the investigation. She interviewed board members, reviewed financial records, and eventually brought Patricia in for questioning. I wasn't involved in that part of things, but Tom kept me updated. Patricia initially denied everything, claiming the payments were legitimate. But when confronted with specific evidence of falsified receipts and fabricated consulting contracts, she finally broke down and admitted what she'd done. She tried to claim that the money was compensation for all the extra work she'd done as board president. The detective pointed out that board positions were volunteer, and that taking money without authorization was theft regardless of how much work she'd done. Patricia was charged with embezzlement and filing false financial documents, both felonies under Colorado law. She agreed to a plea deal that required her to pay back all the stolen money plus penalties and serve 2 years probation. If she violated probation, she'd face up to 3 years in prison. The restitution payment nearly bankrupted her family. Her husband, who'd been mostly absent from the whole HOA drama, filed for divorce within a month of the conviction. Patricia ended up selling their house in Pine Ridge Estates and moving out of Steamboat Springs entirely. By the time summer arrived, Pine Ridge Estates felt like a different community. Tom proved to be an excellent board president, focused on actual community needs rather than petty power plays. The ridiculous rules Patricia had pushed through were repealed or amended to be more reasonable. The generator pad became a running joke in the neighborhood. During the annual HOA barbecue in July, someone made a cardboard cutout of a generator and buried it in a pile of cotton balls labeled "Emergency Snow." Everyone laughed, including me. Olivia Valdez approached me at that barbecue with a beer in hand. "You know, I never thanked you properly for clearing the roads during that big storm. I would have lost my shift at the hospital, just doing what needed to be done. Most people wouldn't have helped after being fired like that. It says something about your character, or my stubbornness. I don't like seeing people stuck because of someone else's bad decisions." She smiled. "Well, whatever the reason, I appreciate it. A lot of us do." Looking around at my neighbors enjoying the summer evening, kids playing on the grass, people actually relaxing instead of worrying about the next arbitrary rule enforcement, I felt good about how everything had turned out. It had been a hell of a winter, but we'd gotten through it. The generator still sat behind the community center, fully functional and accessible now that there was no snow to bury it under. I walked over to look at it during the barbecue, just to remind myself of what had started the whole mess. Tom joined me there, holding a plate of hamburgers. "You ever regret pushing back against Patricia?" "No. She needed to be stopped, though I didn't expect it to turn into embezzlement charges and a divorce. Nobody expected that, but it proves she was corrupt from the start. The generator thing was just the thing that finally exposed it." "What's the board going to do about winter snow removal? Keep you on under the new contract. Maybe add a clause about the generator pad if we can agree on fair compensation. How about $50 per storm if you want it cleared?" "Done. I'll add it to the contract amendment." We shook hands and headed back to the barbecue. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that you only get in Colorado. Somewhere out there, Patricia was dealing with the consequences of her actions. Here in Pine Ridge Estates, we were just enjoying a quiet summer evening. The generator incident became one of those neighborhood legends that people told at parties. Remember when Liam buried the generator and Patricia lost her mind? It was funny now, in retrospect, though it had been stressful as hell to live through. I learned a lot from that experience about standing up to bullies, even when they have institutional authority behind them. About the importance of actually reading contracts and knowing your rights. About how communities could change when good people finally decided they'd had enough of bad leadership. My snow removal business actually grew after everything settled down. Word spread about how I'd handled the HOA situation, and I got calls from other communities looking for contractors who knew how to deal with difficult clients. My reputation for being fair but firm served me well. Years later, I was still plowing the roads in Pine Ridge Estates every winter. The generator pad was part of my regular route now, properly compensated for in my contract. Tom eventually stepped down as president, replaced by Marcus Freeman, who was equally reasonable and competent. I never saw Patricia again after she moved away. Someone told me she'd relocated to Arizona, about as far from Colorado snow as you could get while staying in the continental United States. Maybe that was for the best. She clearly wasn't cut out for mountain living, where people had to work together to handle the challenges of winter weather. The generator kept running perfectly, providing backup power during the occasional outage. Nobody ever suggested burying it in snow again, not even as a joke. Some lessons you only need to learn once. As I sit here now, watching the first snow of another winter starting to fall, I think about how a simple dispute over a generator pad exposed corruption, changed a community's leadership, and taught everyone involved important lessons about power, responsibility, and basic human decency. It all started because Patricia demanded I plow their generator pad, so I buried it in snow and made it impossible for them to access their backup power. In doing so, I accidentally triggered a chain of events that revealed who she really was and freed an entire community from her authoritarian control. Sometimes the best response to unreasonable demands is malicious compliance. And sometimes burying a generator under 5 feet of snow is exactly what a community needs to finally see the truth about their leadership. The snow kept falling that evening, blanketing Pine Ridge estates in fresh white powder. Tomorrow morning I'd be out there with my plow, clearing the roads like I did every storm. And the generator pad would be cleared too, because that was part of my contract now, negotiated fairly and compensated properly. That's how things should work in a community. Clear agreements, fair treatment, and mutual respect. No power games, no manufactured crises, no using institutional authority to settle personal vendettas. Patricia never understood that. She thought being HOA president gave her unlimited power to make demands and punish anyone who questioned her. Instead, she learned that power without accountability eventually destroys itself. The generator still sits behind the community center, humming quietly whenever we lose main power. It's just a machine, doing its job reliably storm after storm. But for those of us who lived through the great generator pad war of that winter, it represents something more. It's a reminder that sometimes you have to bury something under snow before you can clear away what really needs to be removed. And what needed to be removed was never the snow on the generator pad. It was the corrupt, power-hungry HOA president who used that generator as a weapon in her campaign to control every aspect of community life. Justice has a funny way of working out sometimes. Patricia set out to punish me for not following her demands and ended up losing her position, her reputation, her marriage, and facing criminal charges. All I did was plow snow exactly where it needed to go. The moral of the story, if there is one, is simple. Don't abuse power, don't make up rules to punish people you don't like, and definitely don't embezzle from your homeowners association. Because eventually, someone's going to push back. And when they do, all your corruption and abuse will be exposed like a generator pad after the snow melts in spring. That night, I finished my first plowing run of the new winter season around midnight. The roads were clear, the parking lot was accessible, and yes, the generator pad was properly maintained. Everything just as it should be, with no drama and no disputes. I drove home satisfied with a job well done, parked my plow truck, and headed inside to warm up with a cup of coffee. Through my window, I could see the lights of Pine Ridge estates glowing warm against the dark mountain night. A peaceful community, finally free of the chaos one person had created. The generator would keep running, The snow would keep falling and life would go on normally. Just the way it should be.